Our country is also at an inflection point. We're debating and discussing ways to ensure the safety of women. Do we need stronger laws, more effective implementation, or both? And how do we tide over divisive politics to achieve constructive outcomes and solutions? Who better to address these issues and guide us than the Honorable Chief Justice of India himself? Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and join me in welcoming Chief Justice of India, Dr. Dhananjaya Chandrachud, to deliver a keynote address.
The entire team at CNBC TV 18, all the members of the audience and the audiences of the network 18 across the world. Good evening. Well, I'm delighted to be part of this conversation on a subject which is close to my heart: equality, justice, and empowerment. I laud the choice of this ever so relevant subject for the conversation this evening. The irony of having a man as a keynote speaker for an event focusing on issues facing the women of the country is hardly lost on everyone, least of all on me. But the issues that concern women today are broader issues facing our society. They will determine the kind of society we envision for the future. Issues of safety, equality of opportunity, dignity and empowerment are not subsets that ought to be discussed in silos. Every one of us in the country has to be a part of this conversation. Talking about women's rights is not a woman's thing. It's about all of us to engage in serious conversations at evenings like these. The perspective that women bring to this table is indeed irreplaceable. No amount of learned wisdom about the world can replace the insights of women who have shattered many a glass ceiling. By the way, Maithili Thakur is one of my personal favorites. Some of life's most valuable lessons that I have absorbed have been from women colleagues and co-workers, and like all Maharashtrian homes, in a home which has been dominated by women. I do not attempt to fill those shoes, or for that matter, the learning experience which I have learned and continue to learn from my best friend, my wife. But I do believe that heads of institutions, thought leaders, and citizens of this country cannot shrug responsibility. Conversations such as these are not only about women, but about the ability of our systems and social structures to design a more equal, humane society. Equal participation of women in governance, policy, and leadership roles is positively linked to better development outcomes. When we either create or fail to address barriers in the path of women, we are jeopardizing our quest for a better society. Indifference is no longer an option. Before we adopted the Constitution of India, the Indian Women's Charter of Rights was drafted by Hansa Mehta. She was an activist, a diplomat, and a member of the Constituent Assembly, the body tasked with framing the Constitution. Hansa Mehta was a feminist who famously argued that references to men could not be used as a synonym for humanity. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights now states that all human beings are born free and equal, rather than all men are born free and equal. Earlier this year, on the International Day for Women in Diplomacy, the President of the United Nations General Assembly, Dennis Francis, wondered whether the Universal Declaration of Human Rights would be truly universal, but for Hansa Mehta's insistence on this replacement of terminology. Mehta's 1946 Charter was a prescient document. It envisaged women's rights to limit the size of the family, recognition of women's work as homemakers, and demands for creches for working women. Several decades ago, my mother took me to a Marathi stage performance titled I retire hote. The mother retires from life, and she would always threaten me, I retire hona rahe. Hansa Mehta's charter influenced the contents of our fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. Some of its articles were truly ahead of their time and would become a part of the women's movement worldwide, much after Mehta articulated them. More importantly, this charter imagined Indian women not as recipients of welfare and assistance, but as contributors to the reconstruction of independent India. The not-so-quiet subtext of Hansa Mehta's vision was a reimagined public life for Indian women, away from the traditional position in the public-private space divide, a break from the male default option. Even before the Women's Charter, a National Planning Committee, chaired by Lakshmibai Rajwade and Mridula Sarabhai, submitted a report espousing independent economic participation of women. The committee recommended women's control over earnings, the treatment of women as independent economic units, separate from the family, and consideration of domestic work as economically valuable. Kapila Khandwala, a member of the committee, dissented from its findings because she believed that they were inadequate. She hoped that in the future planned society, what would count and count alone will be the individual personality of each woman. What that simply means is this: accept every woman for what she is. The labor force participation of women is 37%. The contribution of women to the GDP is 18%. We have not exactly met the pre-independence hopes about women's economic participation. A part of the reason is the continued gendered allocation of domestic labor. Even as women are entering the workforce, they are never divorced from the domestic realm. They must simultaneously juggle domestic and caregiving chores. They are doubly burdened, almost as a penalty for transgressing the domestic threshold. Besides domestic work being unaccounted for in economic terms, it obstructs women's ability to hold on to paid work or to take on greater professional responsibility. Reports now indicate that gender disparity in employment is on the decline, and women's salaried employment is set to increase. We hope that this would bridge the gender gap in earnings significantly, if not eliminate it entirely. Gender equality is not just a function of statistics, but a function of the lived realities of women. This also applies to assimilate traditionally excluded groups, such as persons with disabilities and transgender persons. Our expectations from these groups are heavily based on the stereotypical understanding of their supposedly innate tendencies. We fail to appreciate them as individuals. As women break rank and enter professional workspaces traditionally dominated by men, they are expected to act like men. Ironically enough, they are also tacitly expected to act like women, act their part, lest they upset the code of womanly conduct. Paradoxically, women may run the double risk of being labeled as demure or shrill, depending upon the assessor's stereotypical understanding how women, quote-unquote, ought to behave. Rewards and prejudices are entirely delinked from the caliber of the professional and colored by her gender identity alone. As she navigates this tightrope, constantly pitting her capability against perception, she must do so unsupported. For a large part of their lives, institutions have operated in an information deficit about the objective abilities of women. Women traditionally were not a priority in institutional design across the world. Even as they break into elusive and exclusionary spaces, women are met with institutional apathy at best and hostility at worst. The result is high attrition rates and professional stagnation in entry-level and mid-level roles for women. The World Economic Forum flags what is known as the male leadership blueprint, which refers to a set of masculine attributes that are associated with effective leadership, and how this idea may well be contrary to reality. Karthik Muralidharan, in his recent book titled Accelerating India's Development, explores the possibility of a digital human resource management information system. The HRMIS, as he calls it, is simply a digital record of employee information intended to create a more transparent and equitable system for promotions for women. Muralidharan notes how mentorship and networking opportunities elude women and disadvantaged groups due to their inability to participate in social spaces outside of the office. His proposal hopes to build a diverse pipeline of leaders across India within public systems, providing a level playing field where social networks are largely made redundant. The key question is, how do we provide women a level playing field? Our experience with the district judiciary is unique and resonates with similar objectives and network agnostic mechanisms. Our district judiciary is recruited through a 3-step examination process, which resembles the format for entry into the civil service. We have seen an increasing intake of women civil judges through these exams in recent years. 58% of the total candidates in Rajasthan in 2023, 66% of the appointments in Delhi in 2023, 54% of the appointments in Uttar Pradesh in 2022, and 72% of the total number of judicial officers appointed in Kerala are women. What this tells us is that once you liberate women from the network of patriarchal social attitudes and provide to them a level playing field on the basis of equality of opportunity, they not only compete shoulder to shoulder with other segments of society, but are far ahead of the curve. But unfortunately, even a measurable show of skill does not guard against the erasure of women's achievements in areas beyond this normative framework. In 2013, Andy Murray, the British tennis player, was congratulated for ending the 77-year-long wait to clinch a Wimbledon title. Well, Virginia Wade, a female British player, had won Wimbledon as far back as in 1977, but nobody thought of her. He was simply congratulated for being the first to win 2 Olympic tennis gold medals. What they lost in the bargain was that both Venus and Serena Williams had won 4 Olympic gold medals each. This is what Carolyn Perez terms as a male default, a phenomenon which treats the public domain as a male preservation and disparages, discards, and erases women's experiences to the contrary. The male default underlines gender data gaps in government planning, which in turn results in normative, male-centric policies which would harm women. Perez argues that the exclusion of women is justified by glorifying simplicity, from architecture to policy to medical research. The idea that simpler policies are better policies per se, Perez claims, is distortive. They make sense only if women are seen as an added extra and not essential. The book suggests involving women in the decision-making process to close the representation gap. In 1969, a distinguished philosopher, Isaiah Berlin, defined 2 forms of liberty: a positive form of liberty and a negative form of liberty. Negative liberty entails an absence of limitations, barriers, and constraints. Positive liberty envisages positive control over one's life and an ability to realize one's fundamental aspiration. In the 19th century, a set of debates hope to settle questions about citizenship, property, access to the public sphere, and political virtue as far as these questions related to women. These debates collectively came to be known as the woman question. Though not controlling or connoting a particular set of questions, the discourse gave rise to narratives and counter-narratives about women in society. These debates have formed the basis of socio-political rights such as suffrage and rights in public and private realms. But let's not make two bones about it. Our Constitution was far ahead of its time in recognizing rights for women, which countries across the world were still coming to grapple with. It was a visionary document which was crafted by the founding framers. Every institution must put itself to test against some of these questions. In making seemingly neutral policy choices, are we privileging male default? Are we accounting for diversity in the C-suite beyond tokenism? Are we making accommodations for women's health, well-being, and professional growth? Are we viewing women as professionals in their own right? Are we doing enough to preserve both negative and positive aspects of liberty? The preamble to our Constitution envisages social justice and equality of status and opportunity, an aspirational document scripting the future of the country. The Constitution prescribes in concrete terms discrimination on grounds of sex, while preserving the state's power to make special provisions for women and children. Non-discrimination on the basis of sex, equality before the law, and equality in matters of public employment broadly form the foundational principles of the guarantee of equality of opportunity and status. There is no dearth of substantive and procedural legal provisions targeted towards protecting the interests of women in public and private situations. But good laws alone, including stringent laws, do not make for a just society. Above all, we need to change our mindsets. Law can carry the journey towards women equality to a certain extent, but not beyond. The mindsets must move from making concessions for women to recognizing their entitlement to lead lives based on freedom and equality. As women have been clamoring in the recent past, we do not want a concession in terms of our security at our workplace. We just want equality of opportunity, which recognizes that, like every other element of the workforce, we're entitled to safe and secure conditions of work. We must zealously guard against apparently protective laws, infringing women's liberties and choices. For instance, laws which prohibit women's employment in establishments where liquor is served. In Anuj Garg versus Association of Hotels, the Supreme Court struck down such a law as it gave expression to oppressive cultural norms which were contrary to the autonomy of women. We must foster institutional and individual ability to look beyond the male default. Women are still having to justify choices in ways their male counterparts are not required to justify. Their access to resources, basic resources such as education, employment, and advanced resources such as mentorship and social capital are checkered. While legal goalposts do afford substance to the constitutional guarantees, they do not exonerate our institutions. Martha Nussbaum, in her book Sex and Social Justice, argued that all human beings, regardless of gender, have a dignity that deserves respect from laws and social institutions. Injustice persists despite and beyond laws. Laws themselves are not empowering. They are a step in the direction of social change. The change lies in a more deliberate, long-drawn, and persistent process led by the people who constitute these institutions. As Dakshayani Veludhan presciently remarked, the working of the Constitution will depend upon how the people will conduct themselves in the future, rather than the law alone. For those of you who don't know about her, Dakshayani Veludhan was one of the 11 founding mothers who signed the final draft of our Constitution. All of 31 years of age, Veludhan was also the only Dalit woman in the Constituent Assembly. Standing at the intersection of caste and gender, Veludhan was a force to beckon with and held her own views independent of, sometimes even contrary to those of her more senior counterparts. Therefore, in conclusion, the foremost inquiry a just institution should make is this: are our systems and structures conducive to inclusivity? And are women supported in making unconventional choices that may not be socially sanctioned today? The Constitution guarantees the choice to opt for the conventional and the unconventional alike. Remember, in the 1960s, for a woman to become a fighter pilot on an Indian Air Force supersonic aircraft was an unconventional choice. It's conventional today. And that's what's changing our society for the better. The Constitution therefore guarantees the choice to opt for the conventional as well as the unconventional. Before we regard any choice as unconventional, wait for the moment to pass. Tomorrow, a new future unfolds in reimagining what it is to be a woman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justice Chandrachud, for your words. They inspire and resonate with a lot of us. I found myself nodding and a lot of others as you spoke, and that's why we have a man to deliver the keynote address, because we seek alliance with men who promote women's empowerment. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom.